Hey folks, I've got an interesting one lined up for you today. We've seen this tale play out time and time again in our industry. There's a small, scrappy, young startup company. They come on up, they disrupt their portion of the industry, they have an amazing product, and then at some point along the way, they go entirely corporate. It becomes all about the shareholders and squeezing as much money out of that company as humanly possible. What happens in that case? Well, customer satisfaction takes a hit, support takes a hit, the quality of the product takes a hit, and it's a vicious spiral. A perfect example of this is what we've seen recently with Broadcom and VMware. VMware, once a absolutely beloved product, has had nothing but what I would say are corporate issues again and again over these last couple of years. So what can we as sysadmins do about this particular issue? How can we insulate our businesses and our infrastructure from tech companies that go too corporate, right? Sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? But I've got Eric Siren on today, and we are going to dissect this issue in and out, and we're going to talk about what you can do as sysadmins to protect your infrastructure from good tech that goes corporate. So that and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hey folks, it's a new week. That means it's time for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. This is your podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks working out there in the trenches day in and day out to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got probably our most regular, most frequent co-host with me. I've got Eric Siren again. How's it going, Eric?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you, Andy?
Doing good. When I thought of today's episode, I thought of you. I thought of you for this one because you and I have had many a conversation along these lines over the years, over coffees and beers and whatever, at various tech shows and things like that. And today we are talking about, the enshittification of tech vendors, right? That is what we are talking about today. And of course, folks probably all know what that term is, but in case you don't, the term enshittification is loosely defined as, once great companies that have degraded over time, chasing margins and, everything for shareholder value, above all else. Basically is how I would define it. I don't know if you would add anything or change anything there, Eric, but that's how I see it.
That's perfect for me.
And so we have a couple of, real world hard examples that we've lived, at least that I've lived here in today's episode. And I think Eric will be able to speak to our Intel example. So I'm, giving away some of the secret sauce of today's episode a little bit early here, but probably comes as no surprise to anyone that Intel is on our list. But before we get to that, we have a couple of recurring segments on the show. And the first is our News React segment. And Eric, I guess I'm going to be selfish and I am going to, maybe this is the definition of not selfish. I'm going to let you go first because I have a YouTube comment on one of our episodes I want to cover and I need to pull it up really quick. So
all right.
What do you got for news?
So, I'm going to go for a continuing news item that we have covered before, and that they keep saying news item A is AI is taking over everything. I saw 40% of the United States GDP is pushed by AI. And then the other news item that comes right after it is how all these places have spent all this money on AI and gotten not a single thing to show for it. And I'm really, I don't know how I feel about the trend exactly, but this is already feeling very 2000s.com bubble bursting.
Yup.
So make sure your investment portfolio is in safe things, because if AI is not going anywhere and it's 40% of the US GDP.
Yeah, and I saw a comment the other day that made a good point that when we talk about cash flow between all these companies that are involved in that 40%, they're all just kind of shifting money all amongst themselves, right? Is there any real new monetary value being created there? I'm sure there is, but it's a minute percentage of the total amount of cash that is being moved amongst all of them, right? Just an observation. So, but you're right. I've seen this compared to the .com bubble a lot lately. And it's funny, back in, I think it was July, for my day job, folks know I work for a security vendor. We actually did a survey of CISOs across a number of different companies. And there's one quote that stands out to me. We're asking them how they feel about the use of AI tools in defensive security, right? That was generally what the poll was about. And there's one quote that still sticks out to me, and it was, what was it? Something along the lines of, AI reading 10 lines in a log file is not really providing a whole lot of value. Right? And the person's absolutely right. I don't remember if it was a he or she or whatever. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I mean, there has to be real value there. And I think that's the big thing that, at least from where I sit, I haven't seen that big, oh my God, there's a ton of, business value here yet. I feel like the whole industry is clawing at the possibility of value, yet none has, well, I don't want to say none. The volume that they wanted to materialize has not yet, I guess is how I would put it.
What I think is going to be really interesting about this, I think it's really going to tie in and in and in several times as we go throughout this episode. Kind of all the same things that we're looking at is a lot of people have talked themselves into things, and they're the ones who make decisions. And so they're basically trying to enforce their will on the universe. And the universe does not care for that. I don't know if anybody's ever tried that before,
No.
but it's usually is not a great idea. And I think a lot of people have fooled themselves into thinking things are going one way, and they're just kind of not. And it's if you'll remember at some episode in the past, I said something like, as during our GitHub or the GitHub Copilot one, when I said, when these AI models first started coming out, people kind of like myself kept trying to use them like search engines. So we'd ask it a question, wouldn't get what we wanted, so we would basically try reframing the same question, just like you do in Google, right? You just, I didn't get my search term correctly. So we would basically just keep trying the same things over and over and over. And what helped for Copilot and so forth is to not do that, but to say, okay, you missed, you're close, you're like 80% there. These are the things, and just refine it and use it as a chat system, as a back and forth, not as a continually saying the same things a little differently until you're right. You see what I'm saying? And where I think that's important here is people are missing that these are language models.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to use them on all these things that are not language. And like, I don't understand why this doesn't work. Like, it's literally in the name of what the thing does. It is not a human. It is a large language model, or however, you know what I mean? They're built around language processing, and understanding what you're saying is great, but if they don't know how to do what you're asking, but they have to tell you something, and this is where all those hallucinations and everything else they talk about comes in. It's all like right there. They totally told us, they foreshadowed this is what it's going to do. So anyway, I'm going to...
No, I think you're spot on. We might have to do a whole episode on something around the value of AI. And I'd be curious, folks listening / watching, do you have any like tangible cases where AI provided, how do I want to say it, measurable value to your job or workplace. I'm sure they're out there, but they're hard to find and actually quantify them.
I've used it personally and saved many, many hours doing it, but there's also comes that thing of you got to know, and it's through practice, just like everything else. But for me, it's always remembering I'm talking to it, and after it has done the language processing, it's essentially a big search engine.
Yep.
And so after a while, you can kind of massage it in a way, but there are certain things it's really good at, and that tends to be where I leverage it. As soon as you step outside that, because somebody, he must be a great prompt engineer. Didn't say that. Did not say that.
Yep.
You can call me and you're going to be disappointed if you're not doing what I'm doing.
Well, we're going to have to do an episode, something along those lines, because I've got a whole line of thoughts right now that would probably take us another 10 minutes to talk through, but that's not what we're talking about in today's episode. That's a great topic. No, we're going to have to circle back on this. And folks, if you have examples of AI providing, hard value in your day job, drop a comment on the YouTube video or the Spotify episode, or email us at contact@sysadminweekly.com. I don't know if you guys can hear it. My dog is having a bad dream currently. She's apparently upset by our conversation of AI. Maybe not providing value. I think she's done now. Anyway, so we're going to move on to my news item here. And the news item I have is surprise security related, as most of mine tend to be. There is a pretty nasty vulnerability out there right now in WSUS. Now, if you've been a long-time listener of the show, Eric and I did a episode on the deprecation of WSUS. And I'll link that in the show notes in case you're curious. But this particular vulnerability was so bad that Microsoft released an out-of-band security patch to resolve it. And in case you want to know what the CVE is, it's CVE 2025-59287. And it basically amounts to a remote code execution that, from what I've read, is fairly trivial to implement. And it does not require user interaction. So now, people are yelling at their radio driving down the road right now, or yelling into their AirPods or whatever. Andy, an attacker would need to have line of sight to the WSUS box. And you're absolutely correct. They would have to, right? But we know from, experience and the news cycle over the last 5 or 6 years, it's very possible for threat actors to gain line of sight to a WSUS box. So, patch it if you haven't. Again, that's CVE 2025-59287. Eric, I think I remember correctly. Before we hit record, you mentioned you had actually installed that one already, right? That particular patch.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in WSUS patching itself, and I don't know if anybody else has ever run into this, but it seems like it'll patch my entire org except itself. And then 6 months later, why isn't it? So I did it same day.
Yeah.
But we're just going to do this right now. And it was fine. Everything was fine.
There's an inception thing there somewhere.
Something's weird.
Patching itself. Yeah.
And I was like, you have to go in and do. I know exactly what you're talking about. I promise you, I have done that. I don't know what's up with it, and also don't have a lot of invested time. I just put a flag on it. If it hasn't rebooted in a couple of weeks, go check on it. So.
Yep. So. Okay, so that wraps up that particular segment. Now, normally we would do our nerd hour segment, but we are going to forego that because both Eric and I have been so busy with other things that sadly have not been doing a lot of geeky, nerdy stuff as of late. That said, I'm going to use this time to talk about a YouTube comment that we recently received on episode 025, What is Cloud Native? That was an episode where Paul Schnackenberg and I talked about that definition. What is cloud native? Why would you want to be there? How do you get there? Et cetera, right? And we were talking about how, when it comes to file services, right? The storing and access of files. In the cloud native world, you would use things like SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business, things like that, right? There was a commenter out there who pointed out, and rightly so, that if you are a fairly large organization, there are some hard limitations in SharePoint for number of files per document library and things like that you need to be aware of, which absolutely true. If you're listening to this episode, thanks for pointing that out. Absolutely fantastic point. I went and looked at the current Microsoft Learn document to see what the actual limitations are. And thankfully, it looks like Microsoft has recently upped the limitations. But, still, if you're a fairly large organization, you have a lot of files, you're going to want to be aware of these. So I'll put this in the show notes, folks. But in terms of like file size, the maximum size for a single file is 250 gigs inside of SharePoint. And items in lists and libraries. So let's see, when a list, library, folders, here we go. A library can have up to 30 million files and folders. So for, most organizations, that's probably fine. But if you're an enterprise, you might hit that 30 million number, right? And that's for a single library, right? An enterprise is probably going to break it up into, different libraries and different sites and all that. But again, some hard limitations that folks should be aware of. Thanks for pointing that out, and happy to share that with listeners here. So be sure to check that out. Yeah, anything you want to add on that, Eric, before we kick things off with our main segment?
No, other than the typical, hey, yeah, there will be people out there who hit that overnight and be mad about it and probably have no reason to be anywhere near there.
Yeah, I mean, 30 million files is 30 million files, but I have seen in my MSP days, it's very interesting how the file workloads can differ so greatly between businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen medium-sized manufacturing companies that have a minuscule number of files and folders. But then I have seen small businesses with 3 people have millions of files. It just depends on what they're doing, what apps they're using, that type of thing, right?
And their workflow, and a lot of times it comes down to like how they think about things, because I'll go in and can you just explain your thought process here? And they'll come back with something like, that is wild to me. I have no idea why that makes sense to you, but
Yep, been there before. My favorite is when you get called into like the finance office. Hey, our folder share is a mess. Can you organize it for us?
Well, I can delete everything. How about that?
You're right. My thing is like, I'm like, I could organize it how I think it should be, but I don't understand your processes and your procedures. So you probably don't want me to be the one that does that, right? So
yeah, I've had a few like those throughout my career. I remember once working at where the tech support was divided out, and I was on the hardware team, and you get a priority 2, hair on fire level stuff. Well, their server drive is out of space, so they put it on the hardware team. So they're like, well, I'm a hardware guy, not a software guy, so I don't know what those files are. So I just deleted them all, and then I sent it back as a P1 because they're down and they couldn't get online. And I hadn't actually done anything, but they didn't know that. The people over on software support didn't know that. What, you did what? Said it was out of space. Not out of space anymore.
Problem solved.
What? Didn't get any more calls like that.
Oh, that reminds me of I've told this story on the show before, but real quick, it reminds me of the case where I had an L1 tech come to me one time and say, hey, we got an alert for a server with high memory utilization. I found this process, SQL srvr.exe, consuming all the memory, so I killed it and solved the problem. Well, anybody who's managed SQL before, anybody who's managed SQL before knows exactly what happened, right? SQL server fall down, go boom.
Yeah, it's almost like it's in the name. I don't know. It's crazy.
It was, needless to say, it was a learning experience. So anyway, let's talk about enshittification. So again, that is this idea that once great companies eventually degrade over time while chasing margins and, taking care of the shareholders, right? Now, I want to preface this with, yes, I understand and agree that most for-profit organizations have a mandate to create profit, right? That's the nature of business. That said, there can be too much of a good thing, right? And maybe I don't want to say a good thing, but you know what I mean when I say that. There can be too much of taking care of the shareholders at the expense of the company and or its customers, right? And we're going to get into that. And so what I thought we'd start with, Eric, here is kind of this life cycle, of this process, right? And I've seen it happen. You and I have both been around long enough now to where we've seen this happen with multiple companies. I think probably the most recent one would be VMware, right? Now, they took a little bit different route to get there. They got acquired and then acquired again. And then Broadcom did Broadcom things to them. You and I did, I think it was you and I, we did a whole episode on the whole VMware debacle. So I will link that in the show notes, folks, so you can take a look at that. But that would be a recent example, right? And it always seems to start like this. And I want to get your take on this, Eric. But from where I see it, it's really kind of broken up into three different phases, right? You have that early phase where you have a new flashy company out there that's innovating. They're really, creating community goodwill. They're reaching out to the community, interacting, being a part of that conversation. And there's very much a quality first focus. This is that phase that puts that vendor on the board. Then you get into that kind of middle phase where they grow, they monetize, they start, building new features and maybe new products into areas that they weren't in before. And this is where you usually start to see a little bit of, I don't know if I want to say user hostility, but at least a little bit of angst, because it's usually during this phase that said vendor has wandered away from their core programming a little bit, right? Their core initiative, right? They went to market to solve X. Now they're working on X and Y. They've diluted their core mission, right? This is usually where that core, some user hostility starts to bleed in. Then we get into the late phase, right? And you can guess what happens there, right? Products get degraded, service quality goes down, licensing and product is nickel and diming, and general, there's a disregard for the end user because, well, in my opinion, a lot of these organizations, they want to just ride on the coattails of the brand or the name, right? Or the technology as it was at its peak. And yeah, anyway, what do you think, Eric? I don't know if you have any thoughts around this.
I have a few, yeah.
Go for it. Let us have it.
So, from a business perspective, this is kind of the life cycle of a business in an established market, okay? You come in, you're the little guy, you have nothing to lose. You're innovative, you move fast, you're small, you lean very heavily on your customers because they're that cycle between the customer and you.
Yeah.
Okay, is what makes your business like balloon. Okay, then they hit a certain point where they have something to lose, and that's where it tips, because now they can't be as risky. Right? When you got nothing, you can risk it all. So I'll go back, and I've actually talked about, I know this on the show before too. NVIDIA would be the perfect example of that, because back in the day, there was this company called 3DFX that ran the graphics world. And they were almost universally hated by their customers, but they built, bar none, the best graphics board on the market. And then this little scrappy company called NVIDIA comes along, beats the snot out of 3DFX. Everybody cheers for them. And almost the next day, NVIDIA turned into 3DFX and everybody hated them. But what are you going to do? They're the last one standing. And then nobody's ever really come along to fully challenge them. I mean, you've had, what was the name of them? AMD owns them now. ATI
ATI
out of Canada was like always seemed on the verge to actually kind of challenge NVIDIA and never quite pulled it off. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned today, my video gaming levels, I'm fine with an AMD chip. I don't really, if they're not as good as NVIDIA, whatever the difference is, I don't care, but NVIDIA still runs the world and they're still the same unpleasant people. But you see it everywhere, and it's like one of my favorite ones is I'm gonna go way back in time here. I'm gonna shout out to my Memphis folks, Memphis, Tennessee. If anybody's out there, here's a shout out to you. See if you remember this when the 92.9 WMFS radio station came to Memphis. They would play almost purely. It was back then kind of that alternative rock that was basically mainstream. Everybody listened to it, but it branded itself as alternative in the 90s, and they pretty much all the time they were just playing requests, but they had to be requests that the DJ didn't hate. So it was a really amazing radio station. Everybody loved it, and they blew up overnight. And then what happened is, well, then they got a morning show, and then they got a weather thing, and then they got all these things, and like within a year, they were just like every other radio station. Like, why did I bother listening to you? What do you bring to the table anymore? So you can see it in all segments, everything. This is a normal thing that happens. I think probably we'll hit on this as we go through the show, but we have passed the point. And like you say, you got to generate. If you're a for-profit company, you got to generate profit for your shareholders, or you basically don't have I don't want to say you don't have a reason to exist, but that's kind of that. So if you're not generating a profit, you're going to go out. And even like the so-called nonprofits, the United States at least has companies called nonprofits. They have to generate a profit too, right? It can't be like generally distributed among the regular, but you still have to make more money than you spend or you're done. So the thing that I think is really pushy about it now is that we have gotten into this place of you have to grow year over year or you're then somehow a bad company. Like if you, in my opinion, once you hit a certain size, like look at Microsoft, they probably can't penetrate the market a whole lot more. They can come out with new products and that's about it, right?
Yeah.
But all of us in some way are Microsoft customers. So they can't reach any more of humanity at this point. So their growth model year over year is basically, it's all bad. All their options are bad, right? As to us as consumers, they're just basically have to figure out how to get more money out of people they're already getting money out of, right? And that's where it goes sour. Is growth, it cannot be infinite. So I don't mind them making a profit, but I do mind them like, well, now that everyone's giving us money, we got to find a way to have everyone give us more money so that we can show that year over year growth, right? And companies that are super fast growing then are bought up by these venture capitalist group. And again, I'm going to be very United States centered, but we can say, because you already listed a few, but let's get off of tech. Let's go Big Lots, gone. Joann's Fabric, gone. Then we can spin back to, man, I'm going to blow up your whole episode in like 3 seconds here, bud. But then the other part of it is I feel like having just finished my MBA recently, I can tell you a lot of the things that you see MBAs in the world doing, they didn't teach us that in school, right? They told us we are here to benefit the stakeholders, which is a bigger group than the shareholders. Your customers are part of your stakeholders. All of your customers, whether they're bought into the company or not, they're stakeholders and they matter. That is what the MBA program teaches you, at least the one I went through, right? Still have to consider the shareholders, still have to generate a profit. Nothing wrong with that, but you don't generate a profit to such a great expense of everyone else that's, you know what I mean? And I'm sure you do, it's basically, like you said, you take it too far. To where the only thing that matters is the shareholders, and now none of the other stakeholders do. And that's kind of where the problem is. And I can shake the finger at the venture capitalists all day long, but let's look at another one too. Is I remember a day when every American was touched by the Sears Roebuck and Company. Okay. That one was destroyed by just bad management.
Yep.
It could have survived. It didn't have to die, but it did and it wasn't a venture capitalist group that did that. It was all internal. It's bringing people up who just forgot what Sears is about. And like, we're here to take products from manufacturers and put them in the hands of consumers and be that, so that there's a whole thing there. They didn't really have a difficult job, and yet they somehow managed to ruin it anyway. So because they forgot, like, oh, we're just here to generate profit. Well, actually, you're here to put product A to B, to skim a little off the top for your time and troubles and share that with your shareholders. That's what you were there for. And they're just like, well, but they forgot everything except sharing with the shareholders. And off you go.
And it seems like eventually all these, companies that are kind of in the late phase of intuitification here, right, is they're chasing that dollar sign.
Mhm.
That's what it all becomes about. And I've got two hard examples here, and I guess I'm going to start with Intel. Intel's a big one, and I think you and I have talked about this on the show before. Eric, Paul, and I have talked about Intel on the show before. So this probably comes as no surprise to those regular listeners. But when you look at Intel, from where I sit, they, for a long time, were the gold standard for CPUs in the industry, right? For a long time. And the era of Intel, that there's two eras that really stand out to me, right? There was the Pentium 2, Pentium 3 era. That's like Windows 95, 98 timeframe. Intel was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely everywhere. AMD was around, yes, but you didn't see them anywhere near to the degree that you did Intel. Now I'm going to fast forward a little bit to more modern-ish day. You remember when the Core 2 Duo line came out? I don't know. I'm blanking on exactly when this was, 10, 15 years ago, something like that. I can't believe it's been that long. But Core 2 Duo, when it came out, for 4, 5, 6 years after, they were eating AMD's lunch every single day, again and again and again. And it feels like after that stage, it feels like, at least from the outside, they just had this mentality of like, we've, we're won. We've won. We're at the top, right? We're too big to fail. We can coast on the name Intel and our technologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And AMD eventually went and capitalized on that. AMD has made they've made a massive comeback, I know you are a big AMD guy. I'm a big AMD guy now too, because more of the open source type of thing. I especially like their video cards because they are natively inside the Linux kernel, which is really cool. That comes back to that whole community thing I was talking about earlier, right? Anyway, back to Intel here. I think where you really started to see Intel kind of start to stumble and struggle, to me, is when ARM and Apple Silicon came out. Now, I don't know if I've told this particular story on the show before or not, but I, at one time, bought a Surface Book 2. That is Microsoft's, Surface, where the screen detaches if you want, but it's an actual laptop form factor. The first machine I ever had that had both discrete graphics in it, had an NVIDIA card in it, and Intel integrated graphics, right? This thing was fully loaded. I mean, for all the horsepower that I put in it, it should have been hovering off of my desk, right? I mean, this thing should have been a workhorse. But it was not. The thing was so clunky. I was constantly fighting with it. So as an experiment, I'd always kind of been interested in the Mac ecosystem at that time. I go out and I buy an entry-level Mac Mini, like the cheapest one I could get, had the M1 processor in it, right? Apple's very first ARM-based Apple Silicon chip. That thing ran circles around that Surface Book 2, and it did it quietly, and it was like night and day. Now, fast forward to today, I'm still running Apple gear, right? That was the beginning of the end of me running, PCs for my daily driver, and now I'm one of those Apple guys, right? So, anyway, like I said, I feel like once ARM and Apple Silicon came out, from where I sit, and maybe I'm wrong, but from where I sit, I feel like Intel kind of had this mentality of like, this ARM thing, it's not going to be a big thing. You know, we're just going to keep using x86 and the rest of the world is too. And I'm not sure I would bet on that if I were them, but that's me. I'll let you get a word in here, Eric.
Well, I mean, I dominated earlier, so that's fine. But no, I'm exactly where you are. I don't know. Well, okay. I want to qualify that because I realize
Okay.
you just finished a big speech on how you're flipping over to Apple. I'm not doing that. Had 2 iPhones in a row, ready to go back to Android. My next phone will not be.
Right.
I tried it. I don't get it. I get
The whole family's
I
on.
get the ecosystem. If you're in the ecosystem, how
Yeah.
it works, everything kind of works better together. But I'm just tired of just Apple and tired of having somebody over in Cupertino, California, tell me how to think and live my life. I'm just
Don't even get me started on the new glass UI. That's a whole different conversation, though. So.
I haven't hated it too much. It does a number. Well, the phone does a number of things that are just now ridiculous. Like, does anyone at Apple actually use their own product? Because this is terrible. Anyway, not going to do that. But I am thinking. And you're right. I'm a huge AMD fanboy. I remember when the Athlon came out. I was one of their first customers, and I've never looked back. I've had uh, my own little battle stories with Intel and, not having to have any similar ones with AMD. They're just a better company all around, from my opinion. Having to deal with other Intel products that don't have CPUs on them, or sorry, like that's not correct.
Next.
Their NICs are terrible. They're awful.
Yup.
They're not Broadcom awful, but they're awful.
Pretty close.
It's basically Broadcom, Intel, and then the entire world. I mean, something that some kid just slammed together in his basement a couple days ago, way above their best efforts. Anyway, I'm probably going to pivot toward ARM in a not too distant future because
it's just, I was going to say, it's just a superior platform in my opinion, because less heat generation, less power requirements. That's where the whole industry's moving. With good reason. And I feel like when I think about enshittification and how Intel has kind of gone downhill here, them being who they are, why are they not leading the pack? Why are they not leading us on new processor architectures, right? I mean, the writing's been on the wall for x86 for a while now.
Look at any industry and you'll say exactly the same thing. I remember just this chance meeting. I was talking to some guy who was, I forget exactly what he was doing, but he was in the green energy space. And he's like, we're really kind of struggling with all the oil companies and everything. I think the thing is, like, if you say, are we an oil company or an energy company? Because if you're an energy company, you already have all of those relationships and you've solved a lot of problems for power delivery and everything else. Instead of fighting green energy, you could just own it and be the green energy people. And you could do it all. You could have the oil, you could have, everything. And that's just another industry doing exactly what Intel did. Is like, you could have been at the forefront of this and driving it because you had all of those lessons learned and those relationships built and the name brand recognition and everything else. ARM didn't ever need to be a thing. It was a thing because Intel got into their little rut and wouldn't come out of it. That is why ARM exists. Intel can only blame themselves for ARM.
Yep, agreed. It's when I think about the topic of today's show, Intel is always at the top of my list. I would love to see them, pivot out of that rut and become a market leader again, because that competition is good, right? What I almost wonder if what's going to happen is they've decided long term that maybe processors is not going to be their big thing, and what they may pivot. Processors will always be their thing, but not generating new ones. I wonder if they're going to step into the fabrication space and only the fabrication space moving forward, because so much of that silicon manufacturing is starting to move away from Taiwan and back to the US. And I wonder if they're planning on that being their future.
Maybe that's how.
And that's conjecture on my part, but
remember that Apple Silicon and AMD, both of those, they don't have their own foundries. Intel does.
Right.
Intel has its own foundries, and so maybe that's part of what caused their own problem is their need to be on this
That's true.
manufacturing thing.
That's true.
They couldn't do it all.
Very true.
Hard to say. I don't know. I still think Intel is big enough and had the talent and the name and everything they could have drawn. If they could have made it work and simply chose not to. I'm going to
Yeah. No.
through poor management or poor foresight or just simply we're Intel and we don't care. And I've seen enough evidence of that attitude.
Same, unfortunately. So, well, time will tell on that one. So I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about Intel. But the next one I've got on my list here may or may not come as a surprise to some people. And I'm going to pick on Dell for a little bit here. And, I can't say much in recent history for their hardware because I have not used their hardware anytime recently. What I want to talk about specifically is the quality of their support and what I'm going to call their antics in the in the channel market. So I'm going to start with support first. You remember Dell Gold support, Eric?
Mm-hmm.
I've not been a Dell customer for a while, so I don't know if Dell Gold support is still a thing. I'm sure they still have some premium tier support offering. I don't know if you're aware of any.
Funny thing is I'm a kind of a Dell in a Dell shop. I don't actually pay attention. I had somebody else. There's a hard drive in one of my servers is blinking red. Can you deal with that? And then I don't.
Got it. So it's off your plate at that point.
Yeah, we're paying. I know, we pay for the whatever. So there are definitely still the tiers and everything. I don't know the names and whatnot. They're all still.
Gotcha.
It's basically hasn't changed much, at least from what you would remember.
Gotcha. Well, I remember, so this would be back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. I was working for an organization that was entirely a Dell shop, and we had Dell Gold support on everything. And it was amazing. Fantastic service, because it was right around that time period where there was a mess of motherboards that had the bulging capacitor issue. I don't know if you remember that. Like there was a year or two where, capacitors would start bulging on the main boards. And so we had a fleet of, 2,500 or something like that. I think we ended up replacing about 300 of them over the span of a couple of years. But, so Dell Gold support was amazing at that time because I would identify, I was a desktop administrator at the time. I'd come across one of these. I'm like, yep, sure enough, looks like bad capacitors. I pick up the phone. I call Dell. I say, here's the service tag. Can you guys come in and replace this? Somebody would show up. I'd let the front desk know that, hey, Dell's going to be showing up. Double check their identification. They'd come down to the IT department. Hey, where's the machine? They'd swap the board out. Done. They just owned it, which was fantastic. And the whole experience was great. Now, let's fast forward a few years. I'm in my MSP days at that point, and we had a couple of customers with Dell Gold support. And, well, to be fair, I don't remember if this happened. Yeah, this was during my MSP days, I think. So I had an issue where I had to have a tech come in from Dell Gold support. And I'm working on something else in the corner, right? I'm I don't know, rebuilding a server or whatever. And the Dell guy is doing his thing and just super chatty, which is fine, but just like some weird stuff. Like there was one thing where he said, "I've heard it's not wise to eat thermal paste." Yeah, I imagine it's not wise to eat thermal paste. Where's this coming from? And it could be the guy was just a weirdo, right? Just kind of out there, whatever, right? But I would have shrugged it off had the work been done properly. I don't remember exactly what was being done to the system, but like it was not installed properly. I remember we had to go through a whole other round of calls to have a different person come out and correct whatever the issue was, right? So, and that kept happening again and again. And service length, the time of length, I can't talk. The amount of time it took to get service, done and completed for an individual case started getting longer and longer and longer. Now, let me go a little bit further into my MSP era when I started doing pre-sales, right? And some technical account management. And maybe this is the way it always was at Dell, but from what I've heard and the folks I've talked to in the industry, it's gotten worse in the last 10 years. Dell coming in and trying to steal MSP customers from out from underneath them. So if I am a technical account manager for a customer, for I don't know, let's say a manufacturer, I go to the manufacturer and I say, okay, yeah, we can do that project for you. We're going to need, 4 servers, a SAN, let me build a quote for you, right? And I go out and I look at my Dell pricing list. I build a quote, and me as the MSP, we're a high tier Dell partner. We get X margin, as our finder's fee for building the deal, right? Dell would come in and undercut us by double what our margin was. There's no competing with that. There's no way, right? No competing with that. So they would go straight to the customer and essentially steal the deal. And it wasn't just once or twice or 3 times. It happened again and again and again. And you know what eventually happened? We became an HP shop, and we started selling ProLiants for servers exclusively. And it was much better because HP never pulled those types of shenanigans, right? And so, it was like Dell was just out to make every single dollar they could,
And wound up losing.
Exactly. They lost our business because they tarnished the relationship in the name of profit, right? Which is the definition of inchitification. So it's unfortunate, but that's the other big one that really sticks out to me on top of VMware and Intel, right? Maybe they've gotten better. I don't know, but it was such a bad experience, those last couple of instances, that just haven't looked back, There hasn't been a need to.
And probably not. It seems like these companies, when they get in that spiral, they can't get out because then they're like, well, we got to figure out how to cut costs. So then there's a million things that happen in that. But the problem is, from a young child, I remember an adage, you have to spend money to make money. The reason, and it comes at every level of our society too, is like the reason that people are poor is because they're poor, because you can't make money if you don't have any. That's a whole thing. And so if your whole thing is like, we just need to spend less and that's going to get us out, it's literally not. And like I said, I've heard that phrase since I was a little kid. Yeah. So it's not new. And it's just like these people now have forgotten that, no, you're going to have to spend your way out. And if you're, we're going to do it by cost cutting. We're going to make, we're going to trim staff. We're going to make you work harder. Because, and I don't know, maybe if it's in our thing somewhere, but I am certain at least some of this comes from, we're going to pay staff less. We're going to cut raises. We're going to trim bonuses. We're going to trim all these things. And now you're like, so why do I come to work anymore? You're not reducing my workload. So I'm expected to give you more in exchange for less. And it can come in multiple ways too. It's like, if I don't at least get a cost of living increase every year, then I'm taking a pay cut. And how many people say, well, I haven't had a raise in 5 years. Well, did inflation stop while I wasn't paying attention? Because if it didn't, then you're getting a pay cut, right? And so
5 years of pay cuts.
There you go. So, well, why would they do their best work?
Yeah.
Because what they have been shown is that the harder I work, the more work I get. And that's it. That's the only thing I get out of it. And look at it let's go back to capitalism. It's a capitalist system that we're working in here, right? The idea is in a capitalist system, paying more gets you more. Okay. So on the other side, if I'm giving more, right? Because what I am
Right.
is I am also a capitalist producer. Now, there's a whole misunderstanding that the people believe a capitalist is a person who believes in exchanging, money for services and money for goods. That's not true. A capitalist is a person who has so much money that they can say, I have amassed capital. That's what a capitalist is. So I am not truly a capitalist because I have not amassed so much money that anybody cares that I exist, right?
Right.
But I'm still
Me too.
right. But I'm still participating in the system in that I have a good, which is me and my ability or whatever, if it's just me turning a wrench or me flipping a burger, whatever, I have something to trade and maybe just my time. Okay.
Yep.
If what I am trading for is losing value and I can't produce any more of it, right? Then all of a sudden, somewhere along the way, you have to remember I'm a person and not a machine. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm giving more, I'm getting less. So what you lose first is my care. I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And so
And that's how it starts, right? Is
exactly how it
once
starts. And
Yep.
then people like me, and not just me, but people, I can then say, all right, I'm going to quit this job because you're not, I've been giving you more and you're returning less. So I'm going to leave. I'm going to go somewhere else. Somebody else will hire me. They'll look at my resume and go, okay, we like this. And they'll hire me. Who's left? The people who can't do that. Why can't they do that? And guess who's talking to your customers now? The people who can't leave because nobody else wants to hire them.
It's like once that spiral starts, it's so hard to stop
It
it.
is. And the only way to stop it is to spend money, but you got these people at the top going, well, the whole problem is we're spending money.
Line must go
the
up,
line. Yeah,
not down.
exactly. You've forgotten the thing that, no, you have to spend money to make money. This is a law. It just, you will not find anywhere. When I started making money for real is when I had enough money to invest it and do things with it. Right. It's
Yep.
not different in business. I mean, the methods are different and everything, but it's the same concept. If you don't spend, you will not make, period. Done.
Yeah.
And if you want, and a lot of it is, so we'll talk about commoditization a lot, where pencils are usually the go-to thing. You get the yellow number 2 pencil. I don't know if it's the same around the world, but around the United States, there's a pencil and it's yellow and has a number 2 lead in it, or an HB is what they call them now, I guess. Right. And you can't tell one manufacturer from the next. That's a commodity. They're interchangeable.
Yep.
So if you want to outsell your competitor, you got to come up with something that they don't have. Okay. And when everybody's like, well, all we're doing is cost cutting to get that margin, then you've thrown away the only thing you might have. For one thing, you're not going to attract the best talent. You're not going to get people who want to make the customer feel better, so on and so forth. And going back to something that you talked about, is like when they come in, they're about quality. They're about doing it because that is their, like, okay, yeah, we know you. There's this established company who has 98% of the market share, and we only have this. So we got to do what they're not doing. And they do that. And then as their market share goes up, they're like, well, now we got to cut costs.
It's a cycle.
You had a functioning business model and you blew it.
Yep. It's a cycle, unfortunately. And it applies to I feel like so far we've been talking about physical, tangible goods, right? We've been talking about chips and servers and workstations. VMware we mentioned, right, is software, but this comes into play a little bit with software as a service as well. So SaaS
and your MSP stuff. Remember that. I wanted to I was hoping you would dovetail back to that, because if those customers said, sure, Dell, we'll buy your stuff. Well, now they're stuck with Dell support and they don't get your support.
Yep. Exactly. Or you run into a situation where, Dell sells them not the same thing that we were going to sell them in that case. Like, for example, they sell them a crappy workstation with Windows Home Edition on it, right? We can't join that to a domain. Not possible. And now we have to say, oh, sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you didn't get the workstation through us. We're going to have to buy a Windows Professional license or a new machine or whatever, right?
And they're mad at you because, well, you're just costing me money. Like,
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a good thing. And Bringing it back to the SaaS thing now, it applies here too, and what I call subscription hell. And when I think of subscription hell, everybody knows I'm a big M365 guy. I really like M365. Don't get me wrong. I want to preface all of this, but I despise M365 licensing. Absolutely despise it. Eric's got the golf clap going on over there.
Your post edit, you need to give yourself a big round of applause here.
Right? And Paul and I have done on different podcasts, Paul and I have done more than one video on licensing for Microsoft 365. And it goes on for an hour and we just scratch the surface. And so a lot of people think it's as simple as okay, business premium, E3 or E5, right? Those are the big SKUs that are pushed and advertised. Well, you have the F series, you have business basic, business standard, business premium, E3, E5, you've got E5 security, E5 compliance. But if you want...
Are you an academic institution? Because now it's a...
Right. Now you got A series. Yep, that's for all the nonprofit stuff in there, right? And then you have add-on licenses, right? If you you want to do some advanced conditional access stuff. You need Entra ID Plan 2, right, instead of Plan 1. And it's all designed in a way to where it feels predatory.
100%.
2, there are things included in some SKUs that should clearly be included in the lower SKUs. And that I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second. This is going to come as a surprise to nobody. If I am a vendor selling a product, I should not also have a profit center on the side that is all about securing the first product that I sold. And so what I'm talking about here is Microsoft charging for things like Defender for Office 365, charging to secure their other stuff. It should be built in. And the one big one that really gets on my nerves, and Paul and I have talked about this before, log retention. There are some cases with some services where if you want proper log retention, to make sure you haven't been breached, to keep an eye on things, you have to buy premium tier licenses for some SKUs, which is insanity. It's absolute insanity.
I'm going to give them an inch here, just an inch, because clearly those security things take effort.
They do. Agreed.
There's a part that I feel like all of these manufacturers are missing out, that you have a duty to create a secure product in the beginning. And I also accept that despite your best efforts, people are going to break them.
Yep.
And that takes additional effort above and beyond. And I don't mind them making some money on that.
Yep.
But what you said, some of it's predatory.
Yep.
And
what I would rather see, I agree with everything you just said. What I would rather see as a security professional is that these security things are not optional add-ons. You take the cost, Microsoft, take the cost of whatever it is to provide that security object. I want you to include it in the product. And if you have to increase the cost of the product, so be it, right? I would rather it be there than have to nickel and dime me after the fact for it, right? I shouldn't have the option of running insecurely, right? Unsecurely, however I want to say it, right?
I'm going to say I think it's unsecurely, because I think insecure comes back to that whole, what do you call it when you're...
Yep. Yeah. I'm feeling insecure, right?
I'm feeling insecure, yes. I think that's a whole different game. I think unsecure is what you're looking for.
You shouldn't have the option of running in an unsecure configuration.
Right. Like I want to put, my corporate database on port 80. Maybe don't.
Oh, please no. Might as well put up a big flag that says, no data to be found here.
All right, let's pivot on that, because I actually had a call today with a very famous vendor. Everybody listening would know who they were. I'm not going to call them out, but I had to stop because I was getting mad. One of the news segments I had considered, then discarded. A lot of the big vendors now are going to push us to a 47-day certificate rotation cycle, and this is going to cause some chaos while we try to figure out. If I had to continue doing what I'm doing, I would spend most of my life just dealing with certificate rotation. And it's just not going to work. So we're trying to figure out, we got to find an automated system. And I kind of been looking, but one of our vendors, we're going to have this thing that we're going to rotate on one, and then okay, but also understand that you have this one part where you can manage it. And then there's all these IAS boxes that serve as the back end. And we're rotating those two with the same cert. And I'm like, what I would like to see you do is just not do that. Just send port 80 traffic back, do all the things up here close to where the customer is. And then in our data center, just do port 80. And then they're like, well, that's not a best practice. And I'm like, explain. And they're like, well, rogue admin to get in there and, get your data as it travels the network. I'm like, all right, I hear you. But thing is, from what I can tell, IIS doesn't really care what certificate is on the IIS endpoint. It just has to have one. Which means that as I want to play rogue admin, the way for me to get that traffic, the way that I would do it anyway, would be I'm going to impersonate one of those back-end endpoints.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've already seen on your system, I can just put any old certificate there and it'll take it. As long as it can establish something on 443 and get a certificate, it's fine with it, which means I could be using self-signed certificates, which means you haven't done a single thing on this God's green earth to stop a rogue admin from getting this data. So how about just let me run it on port 80 so I don't do those certificates anyway? And they thought I was stupid. And I'm like, okay, I'm the idiot in the room. Cool. But yeah, so I'm going to have to, anyway. And this, again, it's one of those, some of it is that particular vendor was bought out by some vulture capitalist group. The particular people I was talking with, I don't think they were that stupid. It's like, what I want you to do is go back to your security teams and fact check what I just said. Go get somebody who's in who's an Andy. Go find your Andy, whoever he is. What do you think about what this customer said? But they're not going to do that. They're just going to, well, that's not a best practice. Cool. And another one of my long-term rants, maybe we should do that someday, is how people say, what I do is automatically best practice. In fact, I hate the term best practice. Well, it's a best practice. Like, okay, that's a thought-terminating cliche. Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yep. And I was going to say, in your description, this is me knowing nothing about, what you're putting in, but I hear port 80 and I'm like, why not 443 all the way? You know what I mean?
But this is what I'm trying to say is like, it comes in to a front end and then it to their device, and then their system then blows it out to a bunch of backends between their device and the actual IIS servers is all inside a locked data center. It's all locked down. So basically at that point, if you're in that network, you're already in that network.
Right.
So cool. I'm passing. So here's, let me roll it back. Let me make it a little bit simpler so you can, maybe I overcomplicated that.
No worries.
Because this comes back, I think I disagree with a lot of people on the fundamental purpose of certificates is they're like encryption. Like that's the secondary function. The primary function of a certificate is identification. Yep. If you're willing to send traffic to anybody who gives you a certificate, you haven't secured anything.
Nope.
It doesn't matter if it's encrypted in flight if you're willing to send it to anybody. Right?
Yep.
Cool. It's encrypted on the way to who? Where did it go? Who got that? Well, I don't know. You realize because you handed it to them and you did a certificate exchange thing, when it got there, they were able to decrypt it without any problems, right? Because you did a whole key exchange. Well, why does that matter? It was encrypted in flight. You didn't solve any problems. You didn't fix anything. You didn't protect it. You didn't secure it. You did nothing. Right?
You handed the mailman a locked box and you gave him the key at the same time.
Exactly. And like, well, he was wearing a mailman's out. Okay. What have you proved with that? And And that's the kind of thing. It's like, so you're telling me like your whole plan to stop a rogue admin is in-flight stuff, but you're not going to do any identity verification on who you're making the exchange with. You have not secured anything. You made yourself feel better, but really what you did is you burned up a bunch of CPU cycles and you accomplished nothing, right? And so this is kind of like, just take this. They didn't want, no, we're just going to keep doing this. Cool. So now I'm going to continue rotating 30 certificates instead of 5 because nobody wants to ask the question, what are we actually solving with this thing? And why am I rotating the certificates? Because the backend, it clearly doesn't care what the backend is. So maybe I just stop doing that. But, me and who I am, I can't. It's like, no, I got to do it right, even if nobody else is. But
every 47 days, you said?
47 days.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It's going to be a nightmare for a lot of systems. It really is. So that maybe one of these new ones just say, what have you been working on? Well, I have been trying to find somebody who will manage my certificates for me because
Oh, man.
Huge amount of manual labor still. Because for the most part, when you swapped them every year, it was every 3 years and it dropped every year. So every 12 months, I forget how many total certificates I have to manage, maybe 50 or so. So it's not pleasant, but I can do it. But when it gets down to every 47 days, I won't be able to.
Well, hopefully we find a solution for you on that one. So, well, what I want to wrap up this episode with, Eric, is I guess kind of circling this back to the SysAdmin. It's a bit of a dilemma, a debacle, a situation, right? It's a problem. What does the SysAdmin do about this? Well, I guess the first thing I would start with is like, the sad fact is you can't escape the ecosystem.
No.
I mean, you can mitigate its damage, right? You can try to plan around certain vendors. Like personally, me, if I was put in a situation where I was, having to choose a virtualization vendor, there's no way in hell I would go with Broadcom, right? Because of what's been happening. So, I mean, you can make some educated choices there and mitigate the damage, but you can't escape the ecosystem.
Right, because that is a time bomb thing in and of itself. You're going to pick somebody else 5, 10, 20 years later, 2 years later, who knows? They're going to do the same thing.
Yep.
That's coming for all of them.
Yep. Unfortunately.
And so and I don't want to discourage anybody because, I've been in the business long enough and I could pivot into something else. I stay in IT because despite all the problems, I still love it. Right. But you need to be prepared right now that vendor management is probably, and we've been talking names that people recognize. I can throw a whole bunch at you that you wouldn't recognize, and they're all worse.
Yep. Same.
And I can almost, I guess I'm not going to quite stake everything on it, but I would stake most of it. If you pick any particular vertical industry, take the leader and whatever software solution is in that vertical, they're probably garbage. Because I've seen it in 4 different verticals now that the number 1 vendor at the top is so awful, they're horrible, but the number 2s just can't even really break through. So prepare for that to be your life in SysAdmin, is dealing with vendor management, the headaches. For the little ones who do have competition, what I can tell you, I guess litmus test, I don't know, is your corporation, the outfit that you work for has a mission, okay? And I'm going to sound, I do sound like a bumper sticker. Fortunately, I work in a hospital, so I can be a bumper sticker and go, we want to make people better, right? Nobody ever yells at me for that. But whatever you are, whatever you do, you have a mission, okay? When you bring a vendor in, the whole point of that is you're going to give them a certain amount of money, and you're going to expect something out of that. And when that's all tallied up, you should have given the vendor less overall resources, money, your time, your staff time, so on and so forth. That complete box should mean the vendor did better with it than you would have. And if they're not hitting that bar, they got to get out.
Yeah.
Okay. Period. Whether you pick another vendor or you just say, we're just going to hire it and bring it in-house. Because when you hire it and you bring it in-house, at least you can put the quality controls on it. If guy shows up, doesn't care, doesn't want to do his job, doesn't like it there, you can fire him. Boom, done. I'll get another one. We'll keep going until we find somebody who wants to be here. Cool. And if you're one of those not great employers we were just talking about, you're just going to keep cycling through people and you'll never find anybody and you'll spend a whole bunch of money hiring and rehiring. And I'm like, well, we need to cut costs. Like, cool. Maybe you have a better workplace. You don't have to have all this huge turnover. Your HR department doesn't have to be so busy. I don't know. Crazy thoughts. But point being, for you, the person in IT, this is going to be a lot of your life. And if you wanted to get into it for managing cool, flashy, blinky lights, that's what I wanted to. And I still get to do it sometimes, so it's not all bad. But you're going to have to accept that this is part of your life now.
Yeah. There certainly is a lot more politics and vendor management and relationship management now than there was 20 years ago, in my opinion.
No, I think, and I really want to believe that you're right. There's a whole lot of thing, and it's, everybody does this. There's the nostalgia for a period that never really existed. So maybe we were just dumber, or maybe we just
that could be.
I don't know. But no, I do feel like there was a time in my memory where even if I didn't like talking to Intel because I thought they were all really just stuck up, self-centered jerks, at least for the most part, the product did what I needed it to do, or at least did what it said it would do. Anymore now, it feels like all of my vendors look at me like I'm a liability and I'm a problem. So great. So like you just start off in a bad
You're on that bad foot.
Yeah. It's like, and again, it's like your company's mission needs to be to support my company's mission, or why are you here? And they don't seem to get that in a lot of cases. And it seems more prevalent than it did 20 years ago.
Right.
But then also, like I just spent a whole bunch of time explaining, I think there are a lot of other differences going on behind the scenes, like we don't pay as well, or, we have the culture of fear where I'll fire you if you don't do what I want, and not a great way to motivate people. So
nope.
I think there are a lot more elements in play throughout the entire thing than there was 20 years ago.
Definitely. The one thing I want to make sure I leave SysAdmins with, something that I would recommend you do, is tomorrow, next week, a month from now, at some point, go and write out a list, or go open the list if you have one already, of all your vendors. Every vendor you have involved in your tech stack from top to bottom. Now look at the vendors on that list. Are any of them used to such a degree that it would be vastly impactful on your business if something happened to them? So the term I'm getting at here is vendor overdependence. And I see this happen a lot with Microsoft in the last 5-10 years, right? Some organizations become so dependent on a single vendor for a noticeable percentage of their business operations that when said vendor has an issue, it brings the entire business to a halt, right? So when we talk about this, this enshittification process, one way that you can kind of insulate yourself from it long term is maintain some vendor diversification. Don't depend on somebody too much, right? Now, what that too much amount is, it's going to be dependent on your business and your risk tolerance, but at least give it a think, is all I'm saying.
And hey, you know what? Some of you young kids out there, listen, a lot of success stories out there were by people who were like, I was in this business and all the vendors for it were terrible, so I just did it myself, and now I am the vendor. And a lot of those turned terrible. I hate to say that, but there are a lot that haven't. Like something I was watching on YouTube, like a construction company, like couldn't find a good software something to deal with managing a construction company. I don't know what it was, and they came up with his app, and now apparently it's the number one app because it was come up with by somebody who is not trying to. I just need to pivot into this. Not some tech bro out in California who I'd never worked a real job a day in his life. And like, I know it wasn't like that. It was done by somebody who does the job. So if
wanted to solve the problem,
knew the problem intimately, was involved with it. And that's how a lot of these success stories start. Is software is one of those cool things. You can do that. You can get a couple of people together and do a whole lot of things in a short amount of time. So
sure can.
Go off and make your millions, y'all. This is your time.
Yep, for sure. Good advice. Fantastic advice there. So,
I'd like to see some of y'all really, make the world a better place by because I
For
think
sure.
people out here suffering too. I'm too old and too gross old, and I guess I just like to complain too much. I'm not going to go off and change the world with my new software product, but some of y'all might, and that'd be awesome, and I'd be rooting for you.
Oh, you're never too old to go do things, Eric. Let's just put that out there right now. So, Anyway, well, we've gone over time as we are wont to do from time to time, but good talking to you, my friend. This is good discussion and definitely relevant in today's industry.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Those of you watching, thanks for spending some time with us. Hope you found value in today's episode. As a reminder, if you want to put in your 2 cents to the show, if you want to add a comment or you had a question or a certain point you wanted to expand on, you can always reach us by commenting either on the YouTube video or the Spotify episode, or again, you can email the show directly at contact@sysadminweekly.com. And you can find all the links associated with the show out at www.sysadminweekly.com. And don't forget, we also have a companion newsletter out at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. So that's all my plugs out of the way. I'll let you folks get back to your day. Again, thanks for spending some time with us, and we'll see you again next week for a future episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.